Hi guys, James at RampantLionReviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we are going to stick to Sweden and we're going to return to a brewery that has featured on the channel many times before. I've had some really nice beers from these guys over the years and I think it's fair to describe them as one of the best known Swedish craft breweries these days. They're mainly known for their hazy New England IPAs, but they also do some really nice examples of other styles as well. So yeah, always nice to review a new beer from these guys and I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. So for this review we are going to head up towards Gothenburg once again. Göteborg, as you would say in Swedish, the Swedish craft beer capital up there on the west coast. Got to get that Gothenburg catchphrase in when we're reviewing Gothenburg beers because of channel tradition and all of that jazz. But for this review we are going to return to Stigbergets Bryggeri. So this particular beer is called Nyrai. It comes in at 7% ABV and it's described on the can as a rye IPA, although it's listed on Untappd as being a New England IPA. So in honesty, I'm not sure exactly what to expect from this one. It could just be a very rye-orientated New England IPA, but I'm sure we'll figure that out when we have a taste of it. But this particular beer was released as part of the local Småskalig assortment through Stigbergets here in Sweden for March of 2021, and this will be the last of my Stigbergets reviews for March 2021. So yeah, really curious to see how it turns out. Hopefully it's another good beer, and I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, let's see how we get on then. As always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Stigbergets Bryggeri before, and you will no doubt see more added to that list in the near future. I think there's about 65 or 70 reviews from Stigbergets. It's just crazy. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Swedish beers that I've reviewed for you. That's constantly being added to, and as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, to tell you a little bit about Stigbergets Bryggeri then, on to my brewery notes. So Stigbergets Bryggeri, as I've mentioned to you already, are based in Gothenburg, Göteborg, up there on the Swedish west coast, and the company was founded by Nils Hultkrantz and Richard Simonsson. So these guys own two bars that share the one kitchen. This is the Bar Kino and the Hagabions Cafe, which can be found on Linnegatan in the city, and they both opened way back in 2007. But this building is actually an independent cinema, and I didn't know that until I went to visit it. If you're curious to have a look at it, you can check out my out and about video I did when I was there. That was mainly filmed in Bar Kino and it was quite dark. That was October 2019, I think, that I filmed that one. But yeah, I'm hoping that I can get back to Gothenburg at some stage and have a look at the Hagabions Cafe as well. That would be very nice. But originally the idea that the guys had was that they wanted to brew a few beers that they could sell in the Hagabions Cafe and the Bar Kino, and this led to them kegging the beer and selling it on to other pubs before they actually started bottling the beers beginning in November of 2014. The original brews that they did were mainly English and German styles, but more recently they've expanded into the more kind of hoppy American beers, and that is where they really made their name. But the original head brewer was Ole Anderson, who is the co-owner of OO Brewing, where he now does all of his basically now does everything. He was with Stigbergets until April of 2017, I want to say. It feels like it doesn't feel like it's been that long that he's been away from Stigbergets, come to think of it. But yeah, he was the original one who developed the Amazing Haze and the GBG Beer Week 2016 beer, along with the Narangi, which was released under the OO Brewing brand. Those are probably three of the four kind of cult classic Swedish IPAs, if you like, or Swedish New England IPAs, I should say. He was replaced, though, for a short period of time by Barnaby Struve, who was one of the vice presidents at Three Floyds, and that kind of marked a change in the brewery, I guess you could say. But soon after that, they moved to Partihalarna, where they were brewing 5,000 litre batches at a time, and they began working on more sour beers there as well, actually. But they started selling their beers in these 440ml cans as opposed to the 330ml bottles that they had before. If you want to see what those look like, you can go back and check out my very early Stigbergets reviews if you search through the channel homepage. But this switching to cans has actually allowed them to export their beers a lot more widely. But these days they've got a brew team of Ollie Banks, who previously worked for Beavertown in London, and also Lucas Munraid, who worked for All In Brewing, one of the numerous gypsy breweries operating around the Gothenburg area. But as of summer 2020, they've got a new brewery in Ringen, which is a little bit smaller than the one they had at Partihalarna. I'm not sure what actually brought about the move to Ringen rather than staying in Partihalarna. I think it was maybe just the property, but they're apparently considering brewing a lambic beer in this new place that they have. And if you read the articles about this new brewery at Ringen, they're wanting it to be like a sort of experience brewery. They're saying that there's facilities for swimming, there's facilities for a sort of bar and restaurant and things in there. So it could be very exciting times ahead for Stigbergets, actually. But they opened up a bar in Stockholm in April of 2020, and they also opened up their own folköl shop in Gothenburg as well. So for those of you watching outside of Sweden, folköl is anything that is below 3.5%, and that means, well, 3.5 and below I should say, that means that it can be sold in the supermarket here in Sweden. Anything above that has to be sold through Systembolaget, the state-owned alcohol shops. So yeah, they've got their own, Stigbergets have their own folköl shop in Gothenburg these days, which I would be very curious to check out. But as of March 2021, when I'm reviewing this beer for you, Stigbergets have produced in the region of 100 different kinds of beer, and that will no doubt increase over the next little while. There's about 3 or 4 different Stigbergets beers coming out through the local Småskaligt for April, and you'll see me review a couple of those here on the channel, of course. But yeah, that is all I can really tell you about Stigbergets for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website, you can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, let's see how we get on with this one then. This, yeah, as I say, 65 or so reviews done with Stigbergets now, so it's just absolutely crazy. But yeah, as you can see, I think this one, the artwork on this is pretty nice. You always get very nice artwork on these Stigbergets because I think it's it's Neil Paling this time. Usually it's either it's Martin Jakobsen, but yeah, there's a few. I think they've got a couple of different artists that do these beers for them. But yeah, lovely artwork on this, as you'll often get from Stigbergets. You can see up there on the back of the can there is the Stigbergets symbol, the sort of signature style writing. But yeah, Stigberget is an area in Gothenburg from what I remember. But yeah, you can see, is this an emu? Is this a cassowary? Is that a cassowary? This one, it looks a little bit like a cassowary. I think it looks a bit small to be like an ostrich or anything like that. So maybe this is meant to be a cassowary or something like that. I don't know where the name Nairai comes from actually. Maybe this is like, is it like the indigenous name for the bird or something like that? But yeah, nice artwork regardless. Gold top can on this one, and I think it goes together really nicely. So yeah, the little plasticky bits covering the label on this one I noticed were a wee bit wonky on this can, but that's not a big deal as long as the beer's good. That's the main thing. But yeah, 440ml can. This one I think I paid about 45 Swedish kroners, which is usual for a Swedish IPA. So that's about €4.50, £4 sterling, and I guess maybe about $5, $5.25 American, just for those of you watching in different places. So yeah, 7% IPA. Like I said earlier, this one is listed on the can as a rye IPA, but if you look at the ingredients list, it says it contains barley, oats and rye in it, and I saw it listed as a New England IPA on Untappd when I took a little quick look to see about the hops earlier on. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly what to expect from this one, but knowing Stigbergets, it will be a pretty interesting beer. The hops in this one, incidentally, are Citra, Nelson Sauvin, Galaxy and Equinox. So we've got a little bit of everything in there. Citra, American of course, 14% alpha acid, lots of mangoes and a little bit of citrusy note. Nelson Sauvin, New Zealand, 16%, that kind of white, green, grapey, slightly gooseberry type thing. Galaxy, Australian, about 14% alpha acid. Again, that's a strong kind of passion fruit and a little bit of a sort of pineapple-y hop in my experience. And then Equinox, another American one, about 14% alpha acid, and it tends to give you some lovely limey notes. But yeah, this I think should be quite an interesting one. So let's get it out and we'll get on with the tasting then. Gold top can. as I think I showed you a second ago. I'm getting Alzheimer's these days, so I'm forgetting things. But yeah, let's get this guy out and into the glass. Very curious to see what this beer has in store for us. So yeah. Looks very nice, I have to say. It certainly does look like a New England IPA. Let me just fix this so that my OCD is happy. There we are. So, as you can see with this one, it has poured exactly what you would expect from a New England IPA. Before the head disappears, we have about a half finger of a frothy, I would say, cream coloured head on this one. There's one or two big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass and a few little ones going up towards the bottom of the head. But overall, it does look pretty nice actually. In terms of the colour, I would say that this one is a sort of pale. It's like a sort of pale, I wouldn't describe it so much as pale yellow. Describe it as a sort of pale, it reminds me of, it's almost the same colour as like a peach juice or something like that. I always like comparing the New England IPAs to different fruit juices, and this one, it's not quite as like pale as like a pineapple juice. It's more like a kind of, it is a little bit more like a kind of mango. It's like a mix of a mango and kind of peach juice or something like that. So yeah, it's not quite pure yellow, but it's not quite as dark as some of the more kind of mixed colour ones that you can get. But you can see the level of haze on this beer is pretty impressive. For a 7%er, I think it's got a decent level of haze on it. Remember though, when it comes to these beers, the colour is dependent on 1, the type of malts you use, 2, the length of your wort boil. The longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, thus you get a darker colour, but that is dependent, as I say, in the first instance on what malts you're actually using in the malt base. But the adjuncts and barrel aging can also play a role, but that is not a factor in this particular beer. So yeah, it looks very, very nice. And the level of haze, of course, is dependent on your sort of oat and wheat ratio and things, and the yeast, of course, can play a role in this as well. But the haziness in this one will be mainly down to the oats actually. But yeah, impressive level of haze on this one. You can see that if I put my fingers behind the glass. But overall, in terms of a rye IPA, I guess the rye is probably responsible for the kind of the slightly different colour of this one, if you like. But yeah, it certainly looks more like a New England, doesn't it? Certainly looks very much like a New England IPA rather than anything else. But remember, with New England IPAs, there's quite a few different directions you can take them in. They can be sort of yeasty and farmhousey, they can be oaty and creamy, they can be wheaty and bitey, they can be rye, sort of rye orientated and a little bit more grainy, they can be barley malt orientated and a bit more bready, and of course some of them can even be a bit more brown sugary and sweet. So yeah, there's quite a few directions you can take these beers in. But yeah, let's take a look at the aroma of this one then and see how we get on. There's nothing overly surprising about the appearance of this one, though if you consider a New England IPA as a rye IPA, though, the appearance is a bit more unusual. But yeah. And the aroma though, it's very, very nice, certainly. The rye, I wouldn't say the rye is overly noticeable in the malt base, come to think of it. It really smells more oaty rather than anything else. It's interesting. Really didn't expect that from this beer, I have to say. So, when you go into the nose of this one, straight away you're going to get a lovely, very smooth kind of oaty sweetness out of this one. It's really interesting how all of that pieces together. The aroma of this beer, I think, is just it's very, very nice. If you sugar it up a little bit more, the beer almost gives you the impression of a little bit of a wheaty kind of bitiness, which I think is great. So it's got it has a really nice, just oaty, smooth backbone to it. I think when you sugar it up a little bit, you can smell a little bit of that sort of rye graininess out of the beer. I always loved, when I lived in Germany, I loved German rye bread. The German bakeries are exceptionally good, in my opinion, but I think the sort of German style bakery, you can get them in the Czech Republic, Austria, Switzerland, places like this. I always loved the German bakeries when I was living there. So the oaty notes that you get out of this beer are just really, really very, very nice. The oaty kind of qualities of this one are the Oaty qualities of this are just really nice. They get a bit more sweet the more you smell of them. You can smell a bit of that rye, grainy sort of bready thing underneath, and then there's a little bit of a nice wheaty element sitting underneath it. So yeah, I like how all of that. I do like how that how all of that goes together. So yeah, the malty side of this one, it's not madly complex or anything like this. It is kind of what you might expect, but I think it works well. So yeah, a little bit of a rye, grainy sort of thing underneath. That takes a little bit of time to come out. You get the smooth oats sitting on top of that. The beer actually does give you a little bit of an impression of a wheaty bitiness, but I don't think it has wheat in it, if I remember rightly. Yeah, it doesn't have wheat in it. Nah. Doesn't have wheat in it, but it does give you the impression that it has a little bit, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, I like that about this one for sure. There is a little touch of a kind of brown sugary element to this one. You get a little bit of that Werther's original butter candy type thing, but yeah, the malty base is quite straight shooting in this one. I think this will turn out to be a nice beer, but let's have a look at the hops then before we taste it. So yeah, on the hoppy side of things, on the green component, you do get a little touch of earthiness in there, but there's a hell of a lot of floral character to this one at the front of the nose. I wouldn't describe it as being spicy. It's more like a very bright floral aromatic sort of thing, which I think is good. And I mean, all of these hops are about 14% alpha acid and above. So that's not surprising. They're all going to have a good little bit of a kind of spicy element or whatever. But yeah, you do get I'd say, it's not overly spicy. It is more of a kind of bright floral aromaticity that you get out of this one, which I really like. And at the front tip of the nose, it's got a little bit of a kind of grassy, citrusy zest to it as well, which I can definitely appreciate. So I really like how that side of the beer pieces together. So yeah, the green side, the green component in this beer, I think, is goes together very, very nicely. So yeah, I think the green side of things in this beer is great. So yeah, quite a big floral aromatic note this one, which balances out the malt base quite well. On the fruity side of things, there's quite a few things going on with this though. You can definitely get a big, strong, pungent, passion fruity note out of this, which you're always going to get when you put Citra and Galaxy together. Absolutely, you're going to get that. There's definitely some juicier mangoes there, which will be mainly the Citra. And there's a wee bit of pineapple, I think, as well, which is more... it's more to do with the Galaxy than the other one. So yeah, there's some nice juicy tropical notes in this one, but the Nelson Sauvin is giving you, Nelson Sauvin always packs a punch, and you can really smell that nice gooseberry, white grapey sort of thing out of that. But you also get the kind of oily, the more oily lime in there from the Equinault. And I always think, you know, these hops are actually a really good, are really nicely paired, come to think of it. I think there's, you know, Nelson Sauvin and Equinault always go together really quite well. And then, you know, Galaxy and Citra always kind of help promote each other's properties as well. So you've got a really good balance in this beer between the more kind of citrusy and gooseberry type notes or whatever, but then you've also got a strong tropical note in there as well. So yeah, lovely white, green, grapey notes, gooseberry notes, and a bit of lime on the kind of front, the very front of the nose. Then a bit behind that, you get those big tropical notes as well. So all of the hops are contributing to this one, and you can definitely detect them all if you know what you're looking for. Absolutely. So yeah, this one I think is going to be quite an interesting beer. So take a little bit of time and ponder over the aroma, as I always say, but it's time to taste it now. So this one is the Rye 7% Rye New England IPA, I guess we can call it, from Stigbergets Bryggeri up in Gothenburg on the Swedish west coast. Let's get stuck in. Slanja, skål, cheers. Yeah, that is quite an interesting one, definitely. It does taste different from the other Stigbergets things we've had before. And you do get that rye element out of it, definitely. Now that's an interesting beer actually, and this just goes to show you, you know, Stigbergets have made their name with these hazy New England IPAs, but it just shows that you can vary these things up quite substantially. But yeah, so yeah, it's interesting how that works, definitely. I was just going to say, this beer, it gets a thumbs up from me. I like this one, and I like the fact that it's a little bit different from the other stuff we've had from Stigbergets in the past. So yeah, certainly has my approval, this beer, no doubt in my mind about that. Yeah, I do like it, absolutely. So yeah, let's try and break down the flavour of this one then and describe it properly. So, where to begin then? Straight away with this beer, you can feel that nice rye quality just blanketing middle of your tongue. The rye is definitely the backbone of this beer, but it doesn't come across as overly grainy. It's actually just got a really nice balance to it. In honesty, I think there's a very nice balance to this beer, and it's just all about how everything kind of pieces together, if you like. So you've got the rye kind of sitting as the base layer. You can feel there is a little bit of an almost wholemealy, brown bready sort of thing in there, but then you've just got the oats sitting on top of that and smoothing it out. Now it's interesting because the graininess does dry out a little bit, and you can feel that the beer does get slightly drier the further you go into the aftertaste, but at the same time it really kind of smoothens out as well. You can feel the oats becoming a little bit kind of more thicker, and they almost get a little bit of a powderiness to them, but then you can feel the sweetness building in the beer as well, which I really like. So you know, the malty base on this beer I think works really nicely. Yeah. Yeah, it's I mean, it's a very straight shooting base in a lot of ways. I think it works. It's really nice, straightforward and layered. I think that is the best way to describe this. So we're talking middle third of your palate. So yeah, the base, you've got the nice rye kind of notes in there. You get a little bit of an almost wholemealy brown bread thing on top of that. Then you've got the oats, and the oats gradually sweeten up the further you go into the aftertaste. But then in the very centre of your palate, in the very centre, in that middle third of your tongue, you do get a little bit of that kind of Werther's Original butter candy type thing coming out of this beer. So I can appreciate how that goes together in this one, definitely. So yeah, it's not got the biggest brown sugary sweetness to it, but I think having that little bit of brown sugar in there kind of balances out the rye, because you know, in a lot of beers that I've had, like rye IPAs, because I don't know if it's right to say you get a New England rye IPA these days and you get a West Coast rye IPA. There seems to be that going on with the black IPAs at the moment, which is interesting. And the New England, the sort of more oaty leaning black IPAs are very nice actually. Yeah, I think it's just interesting to see that, you know, rye IPAs and stuff like this and black IPAs are starting to come back in. So I'd be curious to know whether there is a distinction between, you know, a West Coast rye IPA, which is obviously very barley malt orientated with the rye in there. Then if we're gonna have New England rye IPAs now where there's a lot of rye. But in fairness, there's been it was Alchemist. Alchemist were the ones that always put a good bit of rye into their New England IPAs. The Alchemist ones were always a little bit kind of rye and farmhousey type New England IPAs from what I remember. So that's worth bearing in mind too. It's actually, in my experience, it's actually quite a bit more popular to put rye in some of the New England IPAs in New England itself than it is in Europe. I think in Europe, most of the breweries stick to oats and wheat really. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting point with this. The malty side of this beer is, I think, what sets it apart from the other Stigbergets brews that we've had before. But it's very layered. Rye in the base, a bit of a wholemealy bread, nice oats which thicken up a little bit. You do get a bit of that kind of powderiness out of them, and you get a bit of sweetness as well. Then in the sort of middle circle of your palate, there's a bit of a kind of butter candy, Werther's Original type thing. So yeah, that's definitely an interesting point to make about this beer for sure. I think, in honesty, I think we've covered the middle third of the tongue quite well. But yeah, if you go to that border region between middle third and back third of your tongue, you can feel there is a little bit of a kind of slight doughy, yeasty kind of quality builds up in this one, definitely. So you can feel that that sits there, and there is a bit more of a kind of bread crusty quality. And then on the back third of your palate, you get more, you can feel a little bit more of the rye graininess there as well. Usually you get a bit of wheaty bitiness there, but yeah, you can feel the more kind of grainy elements of the rye sitting there too. But on top of that, you can feel the sort of airy, the sort of more airy kind of things coming out from the yeast as well. So yeah, I think it's really interesting how all of this just pieces together. Actually, I can really appreciate how everything kind of builds up in this beer. So if you start from the back and move forward, you can feel the sort of top of the flavour, if you like, is like this, and then it just kind of moves down. It just kind of moves forward and goes down a little bit like that. Then it kind of condenses into the, as you move into that middle third of your palate, you can feel the flavour just sort of densifies as you go into that middle third of your palate. But yeah, the malt base in this one for me is really, really interesting, and that's what sets this one apart. It's interesting to have such a smooth rye IPA, or I think it's a New England rye IPA basically, this one, but it's definitely more, it's got a good balance between the oats and the rye, definitely. I think the rye comes out a little bit more in the aftertaste though. So yeah, this is an interesting one from Stigbergets. This is worth trying simply for those kind of unique points that I've mentioned. But yeah, on the hoppy side of things then, let's do that. In the back corners of the palate, you do have a nice little bit of earthiness out of this one, and as you move further forward, it gets a little bit herbal, but as you reach the kind of front corners of the palate, you get a nice kind of floral aromatic quality coming out of this beer for sure. You do get a nice bigger floral element building up as you go forward, but then round the kind of front curve of the tongue, it's a little bit lighter and more grassy, I would say. So yeah, I think it goes together really nicely, definitely. So yeah, the green component of this one, I think it does lean towards a sort of more deep floral aromatic note. It's not spicy, and it does have the grassiness around the front curve of the palate, just has a wee touch of zest to it. So I can appreciate how that that goes together too. I think this is just a really nicely solidly done beer from the green perspective as well. It suits the, having a little bit of earthiness there suits the kind of rye base of the beer, and having a bit of a deep floral aromatic note I think suits it as well. So yeah, there's not much more we can say about the green component of the beer. Let's focus on the fruity side of things then. So as I always say, on the front third of your palate, that's where you get that nice oily bubble where those juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. Again, in that border region between front and middle third of your palate, you can feel a bit of a slightly thicker bready note there and a bit of bread crust, and then the base on that front third of your palate is a more kind of smooth, oaty and slightly rye based thing. But yeah, on the at the back of that front third of your palate, you've got a nice little bit of passion fruit. I think you do have a nice little bit of passion fruit in there. So I would say, and that's obviously that's going to be both Citra and Galaxy that's giving you that. But the passion fruit, it doesn't come across as madly pungent, to be honest with you. You've got a bit of it, but then it mellows out quite quickly, in fairness. So yeah, a bit of a stronger passion fruit at the very back of that front third of your palate, but as you move further forward, you get the mango out of it quite quickly. You will get wee undertones like apricot and things like that, and a bit of papaya I think as well. And this is just the back half of that front third of your tongue. But you can feel the kind of pineapple-y notes coming out on top of it actually as well. You can feel the pineapple from the Galaxy pushing its way out of this one. But as you move into the front half of that front third of your tongue, Nelson Sauvin starts to take over, and you get that big gooseberry, white grapey sort of thing that you would associate with it. So yeah, I really like how that side of the beer pieces together in this case. I mean, the fruity side of this one works really well. As you reach the very front kind of tip of the tongue, you'll get a wee bit more of a kind of oily, limey quality out of it, and that kind of builds a good bridge with the sort of zesty edge that you have on this beer too. I mean, Citra can give you some lemon limey notes also, so I think that'll be promoting the lemon limey side of things, because it does come across as more of a lemon limey note than a straight up lime. But yeah, the Equinaut and Nelson Sauvin are certainly working together well, and the Galaxy and Citra are doing their bit as well. It's just a really interesting combination, this one. I think the further you go into the aftertaste with the beer, it develops a little bit of a kind of gooseberry thing. But yeah, it works. It does work very nicely. So yeah, the fruity side of this beer I think goes together very well, and it gets a thumbs up from me, absolutely. So yeah, I like that. I do like how this pieces together. So yeah, interesting stuff, definitely. It's taken me a little bit longer to explain this flavour, I think, because I was quite curious about the rye side of things, but I certainly like this beer. That's a really well executed IPA, but definitely quite New Englandy rather than being a rye IPA. So yeah, and it's not like the ones we had from Alchemist before either, actually. But yeah, let's round off the review with the mouthfeel then. So this is definitely a very smooth New England IPA, I think we can say that for sure. Definitely mid-bodied, smooth carbonation. There's a degree of slickness to it, but like I say, it's got a good balance between smoothness and creaminess for me. IBUs are fairly standard for the style. You know, this is a sort of 30 IBU beer. I don't think there's any doubt about that. You get a bit of graininess coming out of it later, but the malt base is very smooth. There's a wee bit of sweetness in there, and you've got some nice juicy fruity components in there as well. So yeah, I like how this one goes together in that sense. It's another lovely beer from Stigbergets, and this is what we've come to expect from them, to be honest. And they're kind of showing you this is the diversity that's inside the New England style. So yeah, let's leave it at that for this one. I think that summarises this beer quite nicely, although this is a little bit of a slightly longer review that compared to some of my other Stigbergets ones. But yeah, we've got everything out there that we wanted. So yeah, this one was the Nye Rye, a 7% rye-leaning New England IPA from Stigbergets Bryggeri in Gothenburg. Really enjoyed this one. Definitely worth trying if you get the chance, and I would recommend that you have a go at it. Certainly looking forward to my next Stigbergets beers. Next month we've got 2 lagers, I think, and a big double or triple IPA, if I remember right, so you can look forward to those. But thank you again for watching. Check out my social media. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Stigbergets as well, and we will no doubt return to these guys very, very soon. The Nye Rye, 7% New England Rye IPA from Stigbergets Bryggeri in Gothenburg up on the Swedish west coast. Slange, skull, cheers, and catch you guys in the next review.